Tonight, a warning to Rachel Reeves from the former chief economist at the Bank of England. Spending cuts could lead to the UK economy entering a doom loop. As the government looks to make what it calls ruthless savings, I've sat down with Andy Haldane, who says the Chancellor has got to be careful.
I think it would be deeply counterproductive to both growth and to the fiscal position, Sophie, if that led to a cutting back on investment and indeed in spending more generally. Then I think you really are into a doom loop between debt and growth.
As for Rachel Reeves, she's at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and she's been speaking to Sky News, urging Donald Trump not to slap tariffs on the UK. Well, as the government looks to make savings, many eyes in Whitehall are on cutting the benefits bill. I'll be speaking to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Liz Kendall. Also tonight, former and current members of the GMB trade union are lodging a formal complaint over its handling of bullying and harassment claims. We've got a special report. And as it's reported, Donald Trump likes to look Churchillian in his portraits. We'll ask if he managed it this time round for his inauguration. Well, Churchill once said, politics is not a game, it's an earnest business. Quite right. Rosie Duffield and Andrea Jenkins with us for the next hour. I've told them no messing around. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, being Chancellor is probably the toughest job in politics. Actually, I might revise that slightly. Being Chancellor is probably the toughest job when there's little or no growth. Just ask Rachel Reeves. All your choices then become difficult choices. Cutting spending, raising taxes, and if the Office for Budget Responsibility revises its forecast in March, well, the Iron Chancellor, determined to stick to her fiscal rules, could have some very difficult choices indeed. On today's programme, we're leading with an interview with Andy Haldane, the former chief economist at the Bank of England, who argues very strongly about how we need to invest in the social bridges that bring communities together in this age of division. But he also has a warning for Rachel Reeves. Cutting investment, cutting spending too deeply could be deeply counterproductive to growth. If she does that, he believes she risks getting stuck in a doom loop between debt and growth. Now, we'll hear that interview in a moment, but first to Davos, where the great and the good of the world's economies are meeting. We can talk now to our economics and business correspondent, Paul Calso, who is in Davos for us. Paul, you've been talking to Rachel Reeves.
Yes, she's here. This is a big couple of days for the Chancellor. She came to Davos twice as Shadow Chancellor, promised she would come back as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I suspect points in hope rather than expectation, but she's here now. And she says she faces perhaps a bigger challenge than the one she envisaged before the election. Her aim here is to drum up investment, to make the case for Britain as a home for inward investment for the people who are here. Trillions of dollars controlled ultimately by the governments and investors and businesses who gather here in the Swiss Alps once a year. She's been holding meetings all day, will do so again tomorrow to make that case. She did make some time to talk to the media, international media. Interestingly, she does want to try and perhaps get a more positive view of the UK economy out to international investors. She took time to talk to us as well and domestic media, perhaps to try and set straight and address some of the domestic issues as well. I was able to talk to her initially about a couple of issues that she believes signal she's serious about growth. One, that long-standing question over why we can't expand or whether we should even expand our biggest airport at Heathrow. And another about a sacking she's made at a competition regulator to try and signal she really is serious about growing the economy.
We know, Chancellor, that you're considering airport expansion. Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, potentially. You're going to face opposition from your cabinet, from the Mayor of London. Are you really going to make a choice this time between growth and net zero ambitions?
I'm not going to comment on speculation, but what I would say is this. When the last government faced difficult decisions about whether to support infrastructure investment, the answer always seemed to be no. And we can't carry on like that, because if we do, we'll miss out on crucial investment here into Britain. So number one mission of this government is to grow the economy. You've already seen a number of decisions, including on Stansted and City Airport, on energy projects, on transport infrastructure, because we are determined to grow the economy.
Last night, the head of the CMA, the man who regulates competition in the UK, was fired. Apparently for not being sufficiently interested in growth. Is this a message you're sending in favour of monopolies now, all of a sudden?
Well, the chair of the Competition and Markets Authority resigned. He recognised that it was a time for a reset of the Competition and Markets Authority. This government has been really clear that regulators, of course, need to regulate for risk, but they've also got to regulate for growth. That is why growth is our number one mission, and the regulators need to be part of that agenda as well.
And Paul, it's one of those things being Chancellor, isn't it? There's always a lot of backseat driving. There's always a lot of people telling you that you should be doing X, Y, everything should be different. But it's quite a complex picture that she finds herself in, and also, of course, trying to grapple with the spectre of what Donald Trump will mean for the UK.
Absolutely. I think Rachel Reeves is probably clear in her own mind what her plan is. The biggest critique one gets, if we set aside the budget, a whole another question about whether she's actually made the cost of doing business higher. The biggest critique is that message, that plan has not been spelt out sufficiently well. She got a bit closer today, I think. Stability first, then growth, including genuinely tough choices about telling perhaps half her cabinet that Heathrow should go ahead. So she's coming with a stability message at the very moment that Donald Trump, who overshadows this whole event, is threatening to destabilise everything. We did discuss in the extended interview with Rachel Reeves the question of tariffs. She believes that's more an issue for China and the European Union. Outside the EU, the UK's perhaps in a position to be at, perhaps at worst, collateral damage. There's not much she can do to retaliate as a small economy in the scheme of things. You mentioned there being backseat drivers and plenty of advice. Davos is not just the place where you bump into and meet finance ministers from all around the world. You meet ex-chancellors of the Exchequer. And as Rachel Reeves was doing her interview round, in the background, looking at his phone, a man of relative leisure these days, despite his many jobs, was George Osborne, who's done the job Rachel Reeves has done, has held the meeting she's holding here. And he did have some observations about the challenge she faces, some sympathy, but also some criticism, as you might expect.
It's always hard when you come as Chancellor trying to sell Britain, because there are lots of other countries here trying to attract investment and business. I think she's got a particular challenge at the moment because there's quite a negative sentiment about the UK, which didn't start under the Starmer government, to be fair to her, but it certainly hasn't got better. And I think she just needs to articulate a clear reason why should all these people who've got so many choices in the world, why should they put their money in the UK? And I don't think the government yet has articulated a kind of clear plan for growth that makes them say, yeah, let's pick the UK.
Rachel Reeves will spend tomorrow here in Davos having more meetings. I suspect she would love, the Treasury would love to announce a few cast iron investments on the back of this meeting to demonstrate that it's been worth a while and is delivering dividends already. But all eyes are going to be on the main event. Donald Trump, he's overshadowed it. He will attend, or he will address the World Economic Forum virtually. He'll be on a big screen in the Congress Hall behind me. There'll be some CEOs present. Whether they'll get a word in, we'll wait and see. But Rachel Reeves, like everybody else here and beyond, will be paying very close attention to what he has to say.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Paul Calso there from Davos. Well, let's hear now, shall we, my interview with the former Chief Economist of the Bank of England, now Chief Executive of the Royal Society for Arts, Andy Haldane. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to talk to you as always. And it feels like we're speaking at a really important time. Donald Trump in the White House. We've, of course, seen Keir Starmer's response to Southport. Populism is on the rise. Mistrust is on the rise. It feels like the world is slightly at a critical moment. Yeah. And it's something that you've been thinking about a lot. You're calling it the Great Division. Just explain what that is.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Sophie. Great Division, well, I think the world feels pretty fragile right now, economically, socially, politically. If you take Southport and the riots, that's in some ways the eruption of those divisions, a real earthquake on our streets in the UK. And the storm may well have been quelled on that front, but actually underlying that, there's been a shift in the climate of opinion in lots of communities right around the world. A sense of discontent, a sense of distrust, a questioning of multiculturalism in the deepest possible sense. And in this country, you know, the immediate response has done nothing to heal those societal wounds, to close those divides within and between communities. And until that happens, for me, it's hard to see how we go about tackling some of the greatest problems of our time, including low growth and including crumbling and in some cases rioting communities.
I'm really interested in what you're saying there, because this year we talked about Southport, obviously. We've also talked about the grooming gang scandal that people feel very angry about still. So do you feel that there is a justified anger, I guess, towards the establishment in the initial response to these things?
Yes, there's definitely anger. I think it's to a degree justified, because there has been a degree of willful blindness, Sophie, to some of those simmering tensions for a long time.
What do you mean by willful blindness?
Well, I think sometimes it's been difficult to question the cause of multiculturalism without being accused of somehow being racist or xenophobic. And for all that, multicultural communities bring great richness of ideas and cultures and practices. Unless you invest in the cohesion of those communities, you get the sort of things we see in Southport and across more than 30 places across the UK right now. We've structurally underinvested in what's sometimes called the social capital of society, those bonds of trust and cohesion within our communities. Unless and until we start investing in those things, we're papering over the cracks.
You say that the policy response has been inadequate. Do you include the current government in that? The
Yes.
Labour government?
Yes. I mean, there's no long-term strategy as yet of helping bring those communities back together again. I mean, the simple, I would say, simplistic response would be to close the door on immigration, stop the clock, turn back the clock, perhaps. For me, a better and more enlightened long-term response will be to build much stronger bridges of trust across the UK.
And what does that mean, build stronger bridges of trust?
Well, you take the places that rioted last year. It is no coincidence or surprise that they had suffered most from underinvestment in what you might call the social infrastructure of their communities. The parks, the youth clubs, the community centres, the theatres, the museums, the high streets, the things that make life worth living, the things that bring communities together. And if you cut back on those, as we have by between a third and a half over the last 15 years, those fractures, those ruptures build over time, and that is what's happened.
You say in the lecture you're giving, the Great Division could have the same impact as the Great Depression. I mean, the Great Depression was pretty bad, right?
Right.
So this is serious.
It is. I mean, we know quite a lot now about what those societal fractures do to our economy. They undermine growth. When trust is lost, when communities are built on shifting sands, it's devilishly difficult, if not impossible, to get growth going. In that sense, these social tensions aren't some nice to have. They are foundational to strong communities and therefore foundational to strong national economic growth. You look at the epidemic, for it is that, in mental health across the UK, particularly among younger people. That too is a reflection of what's sometimes called the anti-social century in which we now sit. All of these scourges, problems, economic and social, that we face require a firm societal base, which does not currently exist.
It's interesting you're talking about growth there, because obviously growth's been pretty anaemic and it's been a problem for this government as well as the last government, to say the least. The OBR could end up revising their forecast in March, which means Rachel Reeves could then be in a position where she either has to cut spending, raise taxes, or change her fiscal rules. So what should she do?
Yes, well, I think she should have really changed her fiscal rules once, in a broadly positive direction, I should say. The budget, I think last time we spoke, we were making the case for changing the rules. They'd change a bit.
She listened to your interview, obviously.
Well, I'm not...
So be careful what you're going to say here. She might do the same thing this time.
Well, listen, that tweet was an improvement, but didn't go quite as far as I would have liked to open up the space to invest. And above all else, when the OBR opine in March, I think it would be deeply counterproductive to both growth and to the fiscal position, Sophie, if that led to a cutting back on investment and indeed in spending more generally. Then I think you really are into a doom loop between debt and growth, and that's the situation to avoid at all costs.
And the speculation is that she is going to cut spending. So there is a risk of this doom loop, as you call it.
Yeah.
Are you worried about it?
I think it's a matter of degree. It depends how much spending is cut, if indeed it is cut. For me, I think some of the gloom and doom about both the economy and in bond markets is slightly overdone right now. I think once we get into the second half of the year, the underlying fiscal picture may look somewhat better, as might the underlying growth picture. So anything precipitate now, I think, is best avoided.
So you think that they shouldn't panic by the market reaction to the budget then, is what you're saying?
Should definitely not panic.
There's speculation about a third runway at Heathrow. I mean, is that the kind of pro-growth measure that you'd welcome, or do you worry about it from a green perspective?
No, I think whether it's Luton or Gatwick or Heathrow, and I think the first two look like they're almost in the bag, we are congested in our current airport capacity, and this will be a way of demonstrating by deed, rather than just by word, what growth is all about. So yes.
You think that would be a good idea? I guess my other question as well is, there's been lots of speculation about whether the markets have lost confidence in Rachel Reeves. You think that's too far then? You think that's overblown?
I think that's overblown. I think we've seen a global reaction that's something of an overreaction in the early part of the year. Listen, this is what happens, right? Bond traders come back after Christmas. The bonus clock has started again. They put on some big bets. The story they carry in is growth's a bit weaker, inflation's a bit stickier, politics are a bit messier. And in the UK, growth is particularly low, inflation is particularly sticky, and politics, from what we thought was the case, had become a lot messier. That was the first 10-day response. I think we've seen a stabilisation and perhaps even the start of a walking back from that now. I think there's more of that to come.
The other big thing, of course, that is going to impact the UK economy is Donald Trump. And there's a range of opinion, I think it's fair to say, on exactly how that will happen. What's your assessment of what Donald Trump will mean for the UK?
Well, I think my hope is that it'll be far less adverse than is some of the commentary around what he might do right now. The mistake we made with Trump 1, I think, was to take his words literally but not seriously, whereas actually the way to read Trump is to take those words seriously but not literally. So on tariffs, for example, you know, tariffs aren't Trump's favourite word in the English vocabulary. That's a different T word, Trump. So it's all about self-preservation. There's no way he would take actions that would create a growth or push up the cost of living in the US, I would think. But what this is an elaborate piece of game theory, if you like, to strike somewhat better deals on the trading stage and elsewhere. So I'm quietly, very quietly, optimistic that certainly some of the worst excesses that people are worrying about, higher inflation, lower growth, will be avoided. And actually, in things like taking an axe to regulation, thinking very differently about how government functions, there is a chance of real growth and supply side upside there from which we will all then benefit.
Do you think we should take a few lessons from Donald Trump then, potentially, over here?
Well, in one sense, yes. In this sense, lots of parts about UK PLC are not working right now. Lots of parts of our economy are not working as they wish. If we want them to function better, more effectively, more efficiently, more in a more growth-friendly fashion, we will need to disrupt them. Significant reform is needed of all sorts of parts of the UK economy. That requires a disruptor to enact that disruption, what's sometimes called creative destruction. They have that par excellence in Donald Trump and in Elon Musk. Who is the disruptor here to really make a lasting change, say, to public services? So far, I think they haven't revealed themselves.
I mean, I guess Nigel Farage might think he could enter that picture, being the disruptor.
Certainly that. Whether he has profound thoughts on public sector reform, I just generally do not know. But we do need to think somewhat differently than we have if we want different things than in the past to come to pass, including higher growth. And
then just finally, there's been an awful lot of debate about the Rachel Reeves budget, and that many of her, I guess, more recent coverage in the press has stemmed from that. What was your view on the tax changes in that budget? You know, there has been an argument made by some that that has stifled growth, that it has created difficulties in some companies.
Well, I mean, any tax rise is going to bruise someone. And in this case, the bruises were felt mainly by the business sector. I think there were mistakes in execution, but even larger mistakes in the communication around that budget. What is the single biggest barrier facing businesses at the moment? It is getting the people, getting the staff, and getting the skills. If you are to get the people and to get the skills, you need them to be healthy and well educated. So putting money into health and education, as the budget did, is pro-business, if not immediately, then over the medium term. Investing £100 billion more over the 5 years in infrastructure is pro-business. These are the arguments that were not put especially well at the time of the budget. Personally, I would not have loaded so much onto business at the budget, but more importantly still, I'd have found a way of communicating that budget in terms that could help businesses see that if not now, then tomorrow, this was a pro-business budget. And that wasn't done, and that led to the further leg down in business confidence.
Would you have spread the tax rises more evenly, I guess, among different taxes? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, had it been me, actually the simplest route here, economically, if not politically, given what they'd said previously to the government, would be simply to reverse the NICS reductions the previous government had put in place, and which were clearly unaffordable, given the budget envelope. That would have been the path of least resistance. I think would have listed far fewer raspberries than did the budget by business and by others as well.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, was listening to that. Cards on the table. As someone who spends a lot of my life interviewing politicians, I quite enjoy interviewing people like Andy Haldane who just say what they think about things. You know, they don't have to worry about, whips, about party politics, etc., etc. What did you make of that interview, Sam?
And Andy Haldane is one of the most respected economists in the country. I mean, both main parties, Tory and Labour, have used him at different points and look up to him. So what he says mattered, and that interview felt like it mattered because in his own softly spoken way, actually, he did two things. He offered quite a devastating critique of what Rachel Reeves has done in some parts. It wasn't all bleak, but there were points. So he said that she had not gone far enough in the changing of the fiscal rules. He suggested that if, as we expect, she cut spending in response to a downgrade in the forecast, that would be the wrong thing to do, that she picked the wrong tax rises in the budget. And I think all of that is a pretty downbeat kind of scorecard, really, from a very, very important economist. But the other thing he did was he said, we need our own Donald Trump in the sense that we need our own disruptor to shake up public services. And here's the problem with that, Sophie. I mean, I listened to Keir Starmer's speech before Christmas. He told us he was that disruptor. But here's Andy Haldane saying, nah, not that. We still need it and we're still looking.
Yeah, the disruptor line is interesting, isn't it? I thought he was, I put to him, maybe Nigel Farage as that, and he was like, I'll wait to see his vision for public services reform. Thanks very much indeed, Sam Coates, there, a Deputy Political Editor. Well, that interview will be featuring, I'm sure, in some of tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall Editor, Claire Ellicott. Right, let's bring our duo for the evening, shall we? The Independent MP, Rosie Duffield, and the former Conservative Minister, now Reform UK member, Andrea Jenkins. Great to have you both on the programme. Let's talk a little bit, shall we, about that interview with Andy Haldane. What did you make of what he was saying, Andrea?
I think he was right, and it was significant. As Sam said, you know, both parties have listened to him and used him at different times. Now, what was interesting as well, I mean, I think Rachel Reeves has gone about it the wrong way, because you cannot talk down the country and the state of affairs to the degree she is doing, because what happens? Businesses and industry do not invest. Consumers will not buy. So I think she's lost consumer and industry confidence. So you cannot grow the economy like that. You cannot grow the economy by also investing millions and millions of pounds into public sector pay rises. It's been proven that does not grow the economy. And also on top of that, though, we've got issues where, as I said, not only talking Britain down, but we just haven't got that positivity, the growth, and she just needs to change course. And I just think now we have got this disruptor in Trump, then we do need it in Britain, because how are they going to respond to what Trump does in America? They're just going to stick to their course. And look, let's start talking Britain up. And we've got to start investing in more infrastructure projects to grow the economy and in building as well.
Just to kind of put the Rachel Reeves defence, as, you know, it's fair to do, I guess that she would say some of the growth measures that she's trying to do, planning, for example, hasn't been taken account of yet. They're obviously trying to plan something around airports as well. Those perhaps are the difficult decision. We'll have to wait and see, obviously, if it feeds through.
But it's not immediate growth, this, is it?
Yeah.
This is why she's got to talk up Britain to get people investing. And her policies, the fact that millionaires are leaving Britain, is not a good sign for growth.
Rosie, what did you make of the kind of difficult choices, I guess, that the Chancellor's got?
I mean, who would want to be Rachel Reeves at the moment? I mean, you know, I'm no economist, but I can see politically this is an absolute nightmare for her. You know, we've been saying Labour have been saying change and growth, but, you know, you've got to put the meat on the bones, and you cannot possibly have growth without investment. She's saying she's got no money. Every department is being slashed and cut. We've been moaning about, Labour has been moaning about public services for kind of 14 years, or since George Osborne introduced austerity, but we're not investing in them. So I think the political message is so mixed.
But also, I think, Rosie, as well, I mean, look at the first 2 quarters this year. We, as Britain, we was top with America on the GDP out of the G7. So we was top. And now, since Labour's been in power, you know, this last quarter, we are at the bottom with Italy. So the figures, exactly.
To say we are going to be the fastest growing economy, given what
and
was,
it's nosedived under
was.
Labour. But I mean, look, the Conservatives, there was 2 socialists to me, because I'm a low-tax Conservative and one Reform now, but I'm a low-tax, small C Conservative, and we should never have raised taxes when was in government. And so this is why I'm with Reform, because I don't think we've had true Conservative policies for many years.
I have to say,
I'm kind of opposite that. So.
Both of you, you were talking about Labour as we. You said that you're a small C Conservative. I know that you guys are both no longer like officially part of the parties, but it does demonstrate how it is, I guess, quite hard
it's ingrained. Yeah. I've still got Labour values, and yours are probably.
Yeah, but I mean, look at Nigel. He was in the Conservative Party. So was Zia. So was Richard Tice. And so was Lee Anderson. But I think
and the Labour Party at one point as well, right?
It wasn't it? Yeah.
But been on a journey.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what's amazing with Reform, what I've found on the doorstep actually, is they're able to pull from Labour and Conservative, and I think that is quite an unusual position to be in, actually, as a party.
OK, thanks, Beth.
Maybe we can get you to join then.
Really interesting chat. We'll have lots more from both of you later on. But to Dublin now, and slightly chaotic scenes as Micheál Martin was poised to return as Ireland's new Prime Minister, but the process has been delayed after a row erupted in the Irish Parliament. Have a listen to this.
Outrageous, absolutely outrageous.
Reasonable measure.
Outrageous.
Deputy Martin was
outrageous. Outrageous. No agreement. There was no agreement. No agreement. Michael Lowry is an opposition TD.
He will be a Taoiseach of substance. Tomorrow morning.
Well, our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy joins us now from Dublin. Stephen, what was so outrageous? Explain.
You mean you couldn't follow from that clip? Yeah, it was very edifying, wasn't it? That's the Speaker of the Irish Parliament there, Verona Murphy, having a pretty tough day in the hot seat there. Look, to try and summarise this new coalition government here in Ireland, it's a coalition between the two largest parties traditionally on the Irish landscape, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, although Sinn Féin would, of course, dispute that standing at the moment. But they also need the support of a few independent TDs, independent members of the Irish Parliament, to get a majority for the next 5 years. So some of those independents are being rewarded with ministerial positions, but the ones that weren't decided that they wanted to be given speaking time as opposition. And now that raises this bizarre prospect of basically those members of Parliament having one foot in the government and one foot on the opposition benches, and they would be entitled to speaking time as members of the opposition. So the other opposition parties, such as Sinn Féin and the Irish Labour Party, were absolutely outraged by this and saw it as an attempt by the government to put their cronies, as they said, onto the opposition benches as well, and it would seriously eat into their speaking time on the Parliament floor. The point of all of this is it's been going on for several days here in Ireland. Everybody knew that there was going to be a row of some sort on the floor of the chamber once it came back today, but no one here was able to foresee just how serious this row would become. I mean, it was absolutely farcical today. It's absolutely unprecedented in more than 100 years of Irish independence that the Dáil couldn't come together and just elect the new Taoiseach, the new Prime Minister. Once the deal for government had been done, the numbers were there, this should have just been a simple matter of procedure. Micheál Martin's family were up in the public gallery waiting to enjoy the moment. He was then going to be applauded out and get into a motorcade, come here, the home of the Irish President, to receive his seal of office. That was all supposed to happen at around lunchtime. The media here left twiddling our thumbs waiting for an arrival that simply never happened. So what's going to happen now? Well, we know behind the scenes this evening, late into this evening, there will be desperate efforts to come up with some compromise. The Dáil, the lower house, resumes tomorrow at 9 o'clock to try and then put forward the nomination by two members of Micheál Martin as the new Prime Minister, a post he already held between 2020 and 2022. It should be simple procedure if they can work out some sort of compromise on this rather technical issue of speaking rights. But there simply is no guarantee at this stage this evening that a deal can be done. So it's all incredibly embarrassing. Because while Micheál Martin and Simon Harris, who is still now technically Taoiseach or Prime Minister, at least until tomorrow, they're blaming Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin are blaming them for subverting democracy. The word farce has been used about 200 times today. It's embarrassing for everybody involved, really, in Irish democracy, because international headlines are being written right now about how Ireland failed to accomplish the simple task, really, of confirming a new Prime Minister. So the very earliest that will happen anyway will be tomorrow, and even that's not guaranteed.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Stephen Murphy reporting there from Dublin. You two hecklers, doing a bit of heckling your time?
We've definitely had some of this going on in our parliament during Brexit and prorogation, and people holding up signs and things,
definitely.
but not quite that.
Not yet. You haven't been yelling across the... You better behave than that, right?
I'm very well behaved.
Okay.
I've been yelled at, as we know. But
I can't say I've been well behaved.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at you there. I'm looking at you. Thank you. Right, now, as we've been hearing, the government is facing some pretty tough choices to balance the books. And one area where the Treasury believes savings could be made is welfare, specifically cracking down on fraud. The Public Authorities Bill introduced today includes measures to ban fraudsters from driving if they repeatedly fail to pay money they owe back. Well, let's listen to my interview with the Work and Pension Secretary now, Liz Kendall. Thank you for being on the programme. It's good to have you here.
Pleasure,
you
as always.
are making an announcement on welfare. What is it you're trying to do?
So today we've published our fraud bill, and this is looking to tackle fraud not only in the welfare sector, but across the public sector more broadly, so that we make sure that if anyone has defrauded the state, whether it's through wealth or any other bit of the public sector, that we will tackle that, we will deal with it, and we will get the money back. And so on the welfare side, the proposals we're putting forward today will actually bring our powers up to the same standards as we see in HMRC and other parts of the state to tackle fraud. Our powers haven't been updated for the last 14 years. And if you think about the changes in how people defraud the system, whether it's your bank accounts, that's really, really changed. So we need to make sure that our technology, our information sharing and our powers to get the money back enable us to tackle this big, big problem of fraud in the system.
One of the more eye-catching things that you're proposing is this idea to stop people driving, to basically ban people from driving if they're found to have defrauded the system. If you're trying to get a job, isn't having a driving licence quite important?
So this is really important that if you rely on your car for employment or you're a carer or you have a disability, we won't use this for you. But what we're focusing on is people who are no longer on benefits. They're not actually on PAYE, so they might be self-employed or they might have savings. They owe us more than £1,000. We have regularly and repeatedly contacted them to try and get that money back if they've defrauded the system. And if they've refused to engage with us,
so it's a small number of people then. It sounds really tough, but it doesn't sound like it's going to apply to many people.
It actually matters because, you know, a lot of people saying, oh, well, that's only £1.5 billion that the measures throughout this bill will save. That is a lot of money. And it would be, as a Labour politician, I want people to have faith that the social security system is going on people who really need it. That would always be important, but particularly now when money's so tight and the cost of living crisis and so many people are struggling. They want to know that every pound goes to those who need it.
You touched on it there. There's obviously pressure to save money, right? Across all the departments, including your own. We spend a big chunk of government money goes on welfare and benefits. Fraud is the easy bit, right? That's the bit that everyone agrees on. You know, welfare, fraud, wrong, get the money back. That's easy.
Although we do actually have to act on that. We haven't had any legislation, so that is important.
But what I mean is, you know, as a concept, it's easy to get behind. Are you prepared to make the much more difficult decisions in order to reduce the welfare bill as well?
We spend, the DWP as a whole, around £300 billion, £10 billion on job centres and the department, the rest split roughly half and half between pensions and then on benefits. And the really big challenge that we have, and it is hard, is that we have got a record 2.8 million people now out of work due to long-term sickness. We're the only country in the G7 whose employment rate hasn't gone back to pre-pandemic levels. And I want to say this, it is a difficult issue, but the reason that I believe that work is the best way forward is not only because it's about improving people's living standards, it's about dignity, it's about self-respect, it's that good work. There's clear evidence now that it's good for your mental and physical health. And as a woman and a feminist, work is about equality and independence. So we do believe in work and that we need to transform the system to get more people into better paid jobs in every part of the country.
I want to talk about that issue that you mentioned there. And you mentioned about how you believe that work is good for mental health. Because currently 37% of new claims are primarily about mental health, and that's up from 28% before the pandemic. And it's a difficult area. People feel very, very strongly about this, understandably. Tony Blair recently saying we are spending vastly more on mental health now than we did a few years ago. It's hard to see what the objective reasons are. You've got to be careful, he said, of encouraging people to think they've got some sort of condition other than simply confronting the challenges of life. I mean, is this an issue you're looking at?
So I think there's a lot of complicated things going on here. I think that there is less stigma around mental health, which is a good thing. I think that there are serious challenges around mental health for younger people, particularly, I think, exacerbated during COVID. There's a lot of increasing evidence that the issues around social media too. But it is also the case that there are stresses and strains in everyday life, and that is just life. And it's really interesting. I went on a visit, I won't name the supermarket chain, but recently in the work they're doing to help people with mental health problems, anxiety, depression into work. Both the young people who were being helped into work and the store managers saying there's a mixture of things going on here. Some people with real problems that we need to do much more to help give them the confidence and the support. But also just saying to people, you know, this is about everyday life. That we need to make sure that you understand that is the world of work.
So are we spending too much money on mental health claims?
We are definitely spending too much money on people who could work with the right health and support, which would be better for them, better for businesses who need to recruit, and better for taxpayers. But I'm not... You know, life is complex. I'm sure I'd get a lot more headlines if I said there was one simple, easy thing. But it's clear there's a number of problems going on. But our starting point is, if we can create more good jobs that pay a decent wage in every part of the country and get people the help and support they need to get into work and be clear that we expect them to work, that's the best way forward.
We've spoken a lot about the spending pressures, and on the programme this evening we've also heard from Andy Haldane, the former chief economist at the Bank of England. He was talking about what happens if the OBR revise their forecasts in March and there are difficult choices. If Rachel Reeves is going to stick to her fiscal rules. He said it would be deeply counterproductive to both growth and the fiscal position if that led to a cutting back on investment and indeed in spending more generally. I think you really are into a doomed loop between debt and growth.
Well, you know, Rachel's going to stick to the fiscal rules. No ifs, no buts. That is the absolute commitment, rock solid, of this government.
But you understand how some people are worried about the investment and the spending.
But Andy is right to say, how do we get out of this doom loop of ever higher taxes, borrowing, low growth, pressures on public spending? And one of the key things about that, one of the absolute priorities for growth is people. Like, the DWP is the HR department of the growth mission. And Andy Haldane, with his current hat on, I've met him many times to talk about, look, we've got to you can't have a situation where if you have long-term health conditions that you're just sort of written off and not back in work. How do we join up what the NHS is doing with the DWP to get people back to health and back to work? They're two sides of the same coin. So what I would say is we have to break out of that doom loop. And what we're doing in order to achieve that is our programme, our plan to get Britain working. You've heard Pete Kyle on this programme, I think, last week about AI as one of the keys to boosting growth, but also reforming the public sector and getting better value for money. One of the things that's always missing from this debate is, like, you've either got to raise taxes, raise borrowing, or cut spending. People need to talk about reform, getting more bang for our buck, changing the way we work to get better value for taxpayers' money, and in my case, get more people into work. I know it's difficult, and I know a lot of people listening to this who are on benefits will be frightened. They'll be frightened about what might happen, because under the last government, it wasn't reform, it was a cut. But we're going to provide that support, and we're going to help you into work. We expect you to do that, but together I think we can make a difference.
Now, this is a bit awkward, but there's been a bit of briefing around you recently. I don't know if you've been reading the papers, but there has been some briefing around you from someone in your party. They're saying that you're dragging your heels coming up with savings. The Sun on Sunday saying that number 10 and number 11 are pulling their hair out over how long it's taking you to come up with benefit cuts.
So, my God, won't be the first or indeed the last time that people have written incorrect things about me. Look, today we've published this bill that updates our powers for the first time in 20 years to tackle fraud. We've had our Get Britain Working white paper.
We've got the story of the bill, but genuinely, if I was working with someone who was briefing about me like that, I'd be pretty upset.
I've faced a lot more difficulties than that in my life, and honestly, I've never taken my highs too high or my lows too low, and that's, you know, water off a duck's back for me.
There's a bit of talk about a bit of a boys' club in the Labour Party. Sort of targeted briefing along some of the women.
I don't see that.
Gray,
all I know is
Bridget Phillipson, Rachel Reeves. Do you think, is that true?
You're not going to tempt me on any of this. In the end, my job is to do what I say on the tin. I've delivered Get Britain Working. I'm tackling fraud. We'll have a big plan on reforming sickness and disability benefits. And I've never let things written about me bother me, and I don't intend to start doing that now.
Water off a duck's back.
Water off a duck's back.
Now to the US, and surprise, surprise, Donald Trump's been making news again. Posting on his social media site Truth Social, the president made threats to Russia, saying if a deal to stop the conflict isn't reached soon in Ukraine, he'll have no choice but to impose taxes, tariffs and sanctions. But let's speak now to Diana Magnay, who is in Washington for us. And Donald Trump has made, a real play on his ability to try and end this war. What do you make of what happened today?
Well, he's using economic threats to try and get Vladimir Putin to the table. The question is whether that will work when a whole raft of economic measures under the first Trump presidency as deterrence and then under the Biden presidency when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine have not worked. I'll just read out some of that tweet or post on Truth Central where he says, "Stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries." And I think that's the key, because the United States and Russia have very little trade to speak of at the moment. But there is still further possibility for sanctions on the Russian energy market. We saw some by the outgoing Biden administration in the days before Joe Biden left office. And perhaps there is room, for example, to say to some of the countries that do business with Russia, like China, like India, like even the EU, which buys a lot of Russian gas still, for Donald Trump to say, I want to get Putin to the negotiating table, you need to buy LNG from me and not from them. There may be some leeway, but at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky need to sort out what's going to happen in Ukraine. A solution there is a solution on the ground backed by solid security guarantees. It is not going to be part of Donald Trump's broader trade war.
Thank you very much indeed. Diana Magnay there, speaking to us from Washington. Right, let's chat again, shall we, to Rosie and Andrew. Rosie, what do you make of Donald Trump? I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because it feels like every possible thing about him has already been said,
So
every
much
column
already.
inch, everyone's got an opinion.
Absolutely.
What
and
do
obviously
you
I'm
think?
not his biggest fan in lots of ways, but, he's determined to make these changes. And I've got a growing Ukrainian community in Canterbury. They have suffered for the last almost 3 years, and they've really integrated well. They're lovely people. They've all, they work and live in my community and are really welcome. But what they want is to go home. They've suffered, they've seen loved ones die, and whoever can bring about peace, good luck to them.
It's going to be tough, though, isn't it? Because,
Yeah,
a lot of people think, OK, it sounds great, but are Ukraine
and
gearing
of
up
course
for a
there's
big sacrifice here?
Absolutely, and there's so much at stake with all the oil and gas and all of those issues, the wheat prices, it affects absolutely everything. And I've got farmers who are really invested in what's happening. So we're all watching with bated breath, aren't we?
I'm the same in my old constituency, and in Leeds we had a massive Ukraine community. They're amazing. But look at the devastation of Ukraine now and what it's going to need to rebuild that up. And what sacrifices have they got to make? And, if it was happening to Britain, I wouldn't want to make sacrifices, would you, on our sovereignty? But at the same time, they want to go home. And I think Trump's right. And if they can do some sanctions on energy, that'd be fantastic. And the EU should be one of the first to support that, I think.
There's so much to say on Donald Trump, from his tariff policy to the fact that he's kind of best mates with Elon Musk, to there's all sorts of stuff. What's your sort of feeling? I mean, you said you're not his biggest fan. Are you kind of worried about what his presidency could bring?
It's fascinating. I feel like we're going day by day with Trump. You can't predict anything at all, can you? He does seem a lot calmer this time around, and maybe possibly a bit more suited to politics than he was when he first sort of blundered onto the world stage. But
the woman stuff, you must be pleased about those.
Of course I am. And it clearly, it was the will of the American people. That's a lot of people that voted him in. We
so just to be clear,
dismiss him just because I'm on the left.
You talk about the woman thing. You're talking there about saying there's only two genders, male and female.
I think he possibly got gender and sex muddled up. I would say there's only two sexes. I'm not bothered how many genders people want to count, but that was a very clear message, and I think that is partly why he got that.
It needs to happen in Britain, this common sense politics.
You said that Britain needs a disruptor like Donald Trump. What, are you enthusiastic? Are you hopeful about what he could mean?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And look, he has got a good relationship with Nigel, and I mean, myself in Lincolnshire, I'd like to see us taking delegations of businesses over there and see what we can do on a micro level. No, I think this is great. And I think what we're going to see under Trump is a move away from the globalist agenda. We've seen him pull it out of the Paris climate change agreement. And I think we're going to go back to the nation state being more important and looking after your own citizens. And I think that's going to have a knock-on effect here in Britain and in the Western world, actually. And
I mean, that could be... I guess you're saying a knock-on effect in a positive way.
Yes.
But then if you are looking about your nation's citizens in terms of tariffs, trade, then it could have a negative impact on the UK as well, right, from an economic perspective?
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, I'd be very surprised if he does sanctions on or put tariffs on Britain, to be honest. Not sanctions, sorry, tariffs on Britain. And look, I think having Nigel there, who's got a good relationship with Trump, I think to me he's like the ambassador, because it seems like Trump might be rejecting Mandelson, doesn't it?
Yeah,
which would be quite unheard of. So I think the fact that we've got somebody in Britain, I mean, look, Boris was there as well, wasn't he? And Suella as well. We've got people in Britain who are at the table, even if it's not this current government.
It's quite hard, isn't it, for Keir Starmer to know how to respond to him in some ways, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how Keir's going to respond to that. I mean, we've got people like David Lammy having accused him of being very far right and KKK supporting.
And Keir Starmer himself, hasn't he?
It's not a great look, I don't think, if you say the opposite as a politician to what you said before. I understand why people like David Lammy feel they've got to be diplomatic, but it just makes people more believe that you can't believe anything politicians say, and that's not great politically. So I think our government need to work out what the relationship's going to be with Donald Trump, and I'm obviously devastated about the Paris climate agreement in a way that you're probably not.
No, I'm cheering about that, yes. Yeah. Bring it on in Britain
So we have
as well.
a little bit friendly, opposition, that's fine. We were allowed to have disagreement on the panel. Thanks both very much.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Politics Hub. Well, Donald Trump had a bust of Winston Churchill in the Oval Office. Joe Biden removed it, but now it is back. We look at why the 47th president stands so hard for Churchill. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, Prince Harry gets an apology and will get substantial damages after the publishers of The Sun admitted to unlawful activity. We'll take a look at how the Duke took on the tabloids and won. Also ahead, the government fast-tracks tougher checks on knife sales in the wake of the Southport attack. But is it going to make any difference? All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, what Winston Churchill would have made of Donald Trump, we can only speculate, but the president is a real fan of the wartime Prime Minister. So when he became president last time, he popped a bust of Winston Churchill in the Oval Office, and the bust had been removed during Obama's term. And when Joe Biden beat Trump, he got rid of it again, but now the return of Trump has also meant the return of a statue of his idol. Churchill is back. And there are even some suggestions that Trump's official portrait bears more than a passing resemblance to his hero. It's reported that when he has his portrait taken, his main request is to look Churchillian. Judge for yourselves. Well, what do you reckon? Do you reckon he pulled it off? Do you reckon he looks like Churchill?
Can I be diplomatic and just pass on that? I mean, really, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? This kind
It's
of,
got lots of hair,
the
though.
statue back, let's take it away.
No, I don't think it is, because, I mean, look, let's not undermine what Churchill did for Britain. I mean, if we're comparing them both, look, they're both very tenacious. They both love their country, and Trump loves Britain as well. And they both fight for their countries, don't they?
If you were our president, whose bust would you have in the Oval Office?
Oh my gosh, I don't.
Who'd you go for?
Great question.
Sorry, that really put you on the
like
spot.
Millicent Fawcett for me, probably.
That's a good one. That's a good one. What do you reckon?
I mean, look, growing up, Thatcher, I was a big fan of Thatcher.
Yeah,
I thought she was the Queen at the time growing up, you know.
Did you?
Yes, because they looked very similar, didn't they, with her hair in the 80s.
Yeah, a few people said that,
yes.
like, you know, it was a
And I was about 6 or 7,
Queen
yeah.
and then Thatcher as Prime Minister at the same time as well.
Yeah.
So, Trump, Churchill, what do you reckon?
Yeah.
There's a similarity?
Not sure. Well, Churchill famously said, you know, Georgia rather than war, and Trump is saying, you know, he doesn't like war, so I guess there is that similarity.
But also, Churchill said, I can't remember the exact quote, but trust in the people or something, didn't he? And, you know, I think that they both care about listening to the people, don't they?
I find it so interesting, the thing about him saying he wants to look Churchillian as well. Is that whole, like, people's little tricks for, you know, a photo taken.
Super important to him, isn't it?
Can I tell you a funny thing? I'll embarrass him now. Gavin Williamson, he was given a speech, and he's got quite a squeaky voice, hasn't he? And he was given a speech when he became Defence Minister, and then he just stared into space and went, really Churchillian. So I think there's lots of MPs out there.
Everyone's trying to be Churchill.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
To be,
yes, very fair. Very fair. Lovely to have you both on the programme tonight. Really good to speak to you both. We'll have you on again soon, I'm sure. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette presenting. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you have The World with Yalda Hakim. But I'll see you tomorrow.